Hello. Okay, Scream 6. This time based in New York City. We've got all the cast that we were introduced to in the previous movie returning here. And I have to mention, we watched Scream 5 and 6 back to back last night at the cinema. I never actually got around to watching Scream 5 last year, so it was nice to actually see it on the big screen. And I really liked it. It was a retread of the first movie, but it was smart in how they did it, and I just really enjoyed it. So I was definitely on board with number 6 when the time came to finally watch it, especially having the same directors and writers on board. Okay, let's talk about the opening first. I really dug the opening of this movie. It was different, it was tense, it was disturbing. I just loved how it played out and I was immersed immediately. And for me, that's what the openings of these movies have always done. They immerse you instantly into the story, they are shocking and tense. For me personally, the openings of these movies have always set the foundation when it comes to the horror element. Because at the end of the day, these are horror movies. Yes, they're dark comedy. Yes, they're silly and they can be over the top. But they are also horror. And I feel that the openings not only remind us of that, but they give them a certain degree of groundedness. Yes, they're silly, with dark humour, over the top, and sometimes very hammy, but they're also very self-aware, and that's why these films work. But you also want to be disturbed, and they achieve that also. You know, I remember back when I was a kid, I was about 10 years old, 11 years old, and I watched the movie for the first time on VHS, and that opening scene from the original Scream just freaked me out. It disturbed me, but I loved it. It was great and it left an impact on me. And no matter how bonkers the movie is and how wild and hammy that it gets and sort of just over the top, it's that foundation that they build in that opening scene that just gives that film that groundedness, which just retains that element of horror and that kind of disturbing sensation throughout the movie. But unfortunately, for me personally, they didn't quite achieve that with Scream 6. Now, I really liked the first 2 acts of this movie. I quite enjoyed the first 2 acts of this film. There are some standout horror set pieces. I loved the subway scene with the lights flickering on and off, and the tension that was created within that scene was just great. It was fantastic. I loved it. And I just loved how it played out. And there are a couple of those moments throughout the first 2 acts that I just really dug. Some really good horror set pieces. And yeah, I just really, for the first 2 acts, for the most part, I enjoyed the movie. It's the overall story and how it plays out into the 3rd act that I just really struggled to get on board with. And it just overall just didn't work for me. By the 3rd act, we lose the tension and the horror, and it just becomes too silly, too hammy, too over the top, and it also just felt really tired and just repetitive, which is a shame because of the build up to the 3rd act. It wasn't that bad. I liked it. I was on board. It's also very predictable. Like, I guessed who the villain was quite early on in the film, and there's this one moment involving one of the leads, Melissa Barrera, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She plays Sam Carpenter, one of our main characters, and in the 5th film she carries out this certain act during the climax. I'm not going to say too much because I want this review to be spoiler free, but she carries out this certain violent act at the end of Scream 5. And it worked. It was over the top, it was a bit extreme, but it worked. They do the same thing in this movie, and it just didn't work. It didn't have the same effect, and it's because of the build-up during the 3rd act to this moment. And it's like, really? We're going to do the same thing that we did with the character in the 5th movie again? It just didn't have the same effect. It just didn't work. I just felt like what they were trying to say overall in this movie, you know, whether it be social media, it just didn't work for me. Everything in the final act felt empty and weightless due to the silliness of the story and the half-baked themes and what they were attempting to do, which, I'll be honest, I like the ideas, but they just didn't quite pull them off. So I'm going to compare the final act of Scream 6 with the final act of Scream 1, which I know it's unfair, but it's the only way I can best explain how I felt with the final act of Scream 6. So you've got Stu and Billy in the kitchen. Stu is this eccentric character, he's over the top, but he also has this sense of groundedness to him, which is also aided by his performance. So even though the moment has an element of silliness and even hamminess, it still has an effect. It's a tense scene that's disturbing, but also retains the humour. It still doesn't take itself too seriously, and it works. There is still horror and tension within the moment. The last act in Scream 6 is the complete opposite for me. It has none of that tension, none of the horror, and even the humour it lacks. Overall, it just lacks the punch that those previous movies had, and I can't help but feel underwhelmed by this movie's conclusion. Which is a shame, because I was on board for those first two acts. It has some really cool, good standout moments in regards to the horror side of it and the tension, but it just gets too silly and crazy with ideas and themes that I felt are not explored fully or as well as they could be. And it's just ultimately, overall, this was an underwhelming experience. Jenna Ortega as Tara Carpenter, she gives a really good performance in this. A believable and real performance, and in a movie that's over the top and silly, I feel you need a performance like hers for it to work. It's just a shame that overall it just didn't really come together. There is a lot of gore and violence in this. I just wish they would lay off the CGI and rely more on practical effects, because I really think those sort of moments of horror and sort of, you know, those gruesome scenes would have much more effect, a powerful effect, if they were practical. And I just think using practical effects in these type of movies would just be more effective. I think it would have a better response and just more impact. I just think you could just tell when it's CGI, and it can sometimes take away from the horror. Scream 6. I was left underwhelmed. I don't think it's as good as Scream 5, but for the most part, I did enjoy it. It's those first two acts. I was on board for those first two acts. The story and how the story played out, it just lost me by the time we got into the third act. And, you know, it has some standout moments. Like I said, the subway scene is fantastic. I really dug the opening. But the movie, they just didn't stick the landing. And I just don't think it's as clever or smart as the previous entries. So this one was a bit of a tricky one for me to sort of score, because I did enjoy those first two acts. But it's an okay experience. It's an enjoyable experience. And yeah, they are my thoughts on Scream 6. A little bit underwhelming for me, and I wouldn't say this was one of the strongest in the series, but it's entertaining, and I will be giving Scream 6 a 6 out of 10. They are my thoughts on Scream 6. What did you guys think? Please let me know below and let's get a discussion going. If you've made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to see future reviews from a geek in Wales just ramble on, then please hit that subscribe button. It'll mean an awful lot to me. Going to catch 65 over the weekend. Really looking forward to that. It's one of my anticipated movies of the year. It was in my top 10 anticipated movies of 2023. If you haven't seen that video, please check it out. I'll leave a link by here somewhere. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.